Welcome to True Echo, where real stories echo louder than fiction. Today you're about to witness a tale of quiet strength and unshakable dignity. One morning, a powerful black woman with a first-class ticket was denied boarding, not for a missing document or a system glitch, but for daring to look out of place. But she didn't shout. She didn't argue. Instead, she made one phone call and brought an entire airline to its knees. Stay with us because what happens next will change how you see silence, power, and justice. The terminal at JFK shimmered under the pale wash of early morning light. It was 6:42 a.m. when Celeste Morgan stepped through the sliding glass doors, her heels clicking crisply against the polished floor. Her silhouette was striking: tailored black pantsuit, an olive silk scarf knotted elegantly around her neck, and a brown leather bag worn just enough to hint at its sentimental value. She was calm, collected, and carried herself like someone who had long since earned her seat at every table. But on this morning, that seat, 1A in Horizon Air's first-class cabin, was about to become the battleground for something far greater than comfort or convenience. Celeste wasn't just another business traveler. At 38, she was the founder and CEO of Morgan Fresh Systems, a clean food logistics company supplying organic produce to over 30 retail chains and 5 major universities. She had recently signed a $48 million contract with Horizon Air to overhaul its first-class in-flight meals, a contract that made her name both feared and revered inside the airline's boardrooms. But none of that mattered to the young woman behind the check-in counter at Gate 17. Haley Dorsey was new to JFK. Freshly transferred from Tulsa just 3 weeks prior, she still walked like she had something to prove. In her crisply pressed Horizon uniform and glossy name tag, she scanned boarding passes with robotic efficiency. She smiled at the polished businessmen, nodded at the luxury-suited women, but when Celeste approached the counter, ticket in hand, something in Haley's demeanor shifted. Celeste offered a polite nod. "Good morning." Haley barely glanced up before scanning the ticket, and then freezing. Her eyes moved from the boarding pass to the woman in front of her. Pause. Then a double take. Then the faint arch of an eyebrow. "This lane is for first-class passengers," she said, her voice tight and formal. Celeste didn't blink. "I know." There was no trace of anger in her voice, only the quiet firmness of someone who had heard that line before and outgrown the need to defend herself against it. Haley's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her eyes flicked down to the name on the boarding pass again, Celeste Morgan, and then back up, searching the woman's face as if expecting her to flinch. When Celeste didn't, the silence grew awkward. Behind her, a few passengers began to line up. A man in a Patagonia fleece sipped his coffee impatiently. A young couple with matching carry-ons whispered. Haley cleared her throat. "May I see your ID?" Without a word, Celeste reached into her coat pocket and produced her Ohio driver's license. She placed it gently on the counter. Still, Haley didn't scan the boarding pass. Instead, she leaned subtly to the side and whispered something into her radio. Moments later, a security guard appeared. No greeting. No explanation. Just a stiff posture and a scrutinizing stare. He stood slightly too close to Celeste, arms crossed, eyes alert, as if her presence alone posed a threat to the sanctity of Gate 17. Celeste didn't move. She didn't speak. But her hand tightened slightly around the strap of her leather bag. Inside that bag was a folder, plain, cream-colored, embossed only with the faint logo of Morgan Fresh. Inside that folder was the signed contract with Horizon Air. 37 pages of logistics, service commitments, and pricing models, each line a testament to years of labor, grit, and grace under pressure. And at that moment, none of it mattered. In her other hand, she held a phone. With her thumb, she unlocked it and scrolled through contacts. She tapped a name. 2 rings. "Maggie, it's me. Pull up the Horizon contract, the $48 million one. I'm at JFK. Gate 17. Looks like they need a reminder." No yelling. No threats. Just that calm, measured voice. Maggie Geller, her longtime assistant, needed no further instructions. "I'll flag the alert. Do you want me to call Cynthia?" "Not yet," Celeste replied, glancing at Haley, who was now pretending to type something onto her screen. "Let's give them a chance." The guard remained rooted beside her, an immovable presence. Passengers behind her murmured quietly, assuming she was being held for some sort of error. "Maybe it's a fake ticket," someone whispered. "She's probably trying to sneak in." But Celeste had heard it all before. She had been mistaken for the help at executive dinners, confused for a caterer at investor conferences, followed in luxury boutiques, and asked to show proof of purchase in airports, hotels, and boardrooms alike. Once, in a Houston dealership, a saleswoman suggested she look at the used cars in the back, right before Celeste showed her the PO for a corporate fleet purchase. She never shouted. She never argued. She just let her actions speak for her. And now, at gate 17, she was about to do it again. Minutes passed. Then an alert hit Horizon's internal comms network. VIP guest Celeste Morgan being held at JFK Gate 17. Contract value, $48 million. Suggest immediate executive oversight. On the 10th floor of the terminal, Cynthia Reyes, the Northeast Regional Director, was in a strategy session when the message hit her inbox. She didn't sip her coffee. She didn't excuse herself politely. She stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled. Cancel the meeting, she said sharply. Get legal. Now. Back at the gate, Celeste's boarding pass still sat untouched on the counter. Her ID lay neatly beside it. Anne Haley Dorsey, now visibly nervous, kept glancing at her screen as if searching for a reason to justify the delay. The security guard hadn't moved. Neither had Celeste. She didn't have to. The system was already shaking. At precisely 7:18 a.m., the atmosphere at Gate 17 began to change. The murmurs behind Celeste turned into subtle tension as more passengers began to sense that something was off. Most couldn't name it. They just felt it, like a low vibration running beneath the polished floor tiles. Haley, now sweating under her collar, remained behind the counter, pretending to busy herself with fake queries. The screen in front of her hadn't changed. Everything matched: name, seat, flight. The system said clear. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something, or perhaps someone. What she didn't realize was that the person she had stopped wasn't just a name on a manifest. Celeste Morgan was the woman Horizon's entire Northeast meal service was now built upon. The only reason the airline had survived a PR disaster 3 months ago. And the very reason Cynthia Reyes had just stormed out of her office upstairs, heels pounding the marble like warning drums. As Cynthia took the elevator down with Justin Cole, Horizon's Eastern Regional Legal Advisor, she spoke with tight, clipped urgency. Do not open your mouth unless I tell you to. And do not mention protocol. We're beyond that. I understand, Justin said, adjusting his tie. Do you? Cynthia snapped. Because if this ends up on the front page of any outlet, we won't just lose the contract, we'll lose every inch of credibility we rebuilt after the prison food tray scandal. This isn't about passenger experience anymore. This is about survival. Meanwhile, back at Gate 17, Celeste remained silent. Her calm was unnerving to those watching. A silence that wasn't passive, but powerful. A silence that said, you've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Mia, another gate agent, stepped closer to Haley. Are you sure something's wrong? She whispered, her eyes narrowing. Haley didn't look up. I don't know. It's just a feeling. Mia frowned. Instinct isn't policy. That should have been enough. But for Haley it wasn't. Deep down, she was still clinging to something unspoken, an unease she couldn't articulate. Celeste didn't look like the first-class passengers she was trained to serve. No designer logo in sight, no platinum card flashed. Just calm elegance, like someone who didn't need to prove anything. And that, Haley realized too late, was exactly what made her dangerous. Inside the system, Maggie Geller had just forwarded the flagged contract to 3 key executives. Cynthia Reyes, Jack Renault, head of Horizon's Food and Customer Experience, and Elise Stone, Brand Crisis Management Lead. In the email, she included one damning line. VIP client Celeste Morgan, detained at Gate 17. Suggest reviewing the cameras immediately. Jack Renault, seated in Horizon's headquarters in Minneapolis, froze as he read it. His mind flashed back to the day Celeste walked into the boardroom with a cloth grocery bag instead of a pitch deck. She hadn't brought slides. She had brought cherry tomatoes from a small Indiana farm, kale from the Ozarks, and whole grain bread in biodegradable wrap. When someone joked, "Is this a picnic?" she had replied, "No. This is the new altitude standard." He remembered how she refused media interviews. How she told them, "Don't put my face on the meal tray. I'm not the product. The food is." And now she was being treated like a trespasser in her own system. Back in JFK, the terminal's quiet hum was interrupted by a sudden shift of presence. Cynthia Reyes arrived. Her red suit stood out like a flare. Her stride was direct, her expression unreadable. Justin Cole followed closely behind, already on his earpiece, muttering instructions to legal. Cynthia didn't scan the gate. Her eyes went straight to the figure standing near the counter, composed, still, and utterly unshaken. "Miss Morgan?" she asked. Celeste slowly turned. Her voice was low but precise. I was told this lane is for premium passengers. Cynthia swallowed. She didn't correct. She didn't deflect. She simply nodded. I'd like to invite you to a private lounge to discuss this immediately. No, Celeste replied. Let's not go anywhere. I'm exactly where I need to be. Cynthia's composure cracked for the briefest second. Behind her, Mia, now fully realizing what was unfolding, turned to Haley. Do you know who that is? Haley, pale, still trying to stand upright, whispered, She's the CEO? Mia nodded slowly. She's the woman whose contract feeds every single first-class meal for Horizon's entire Western and Midwestern network. You just stopped the one person we've spent months negotiating with. Haley's lips parted. But there was nothing left to say. At that moment, Celeste gently reached into her bag and retrieved the original contract, the cream-colored folder with signatures still crisp. She handed it to Cynthia without ceremony. This isn't about me, she said. This is about what you allow to happen at your front lines. You can't fix branding until you fix the people holding the scanner. Justin Cole opened his mouth to offer an apology, but Celeste raised her hand slightly. I don't want an apology, she said. I want an explanation. Because next time it might not be me standing here. And they won't have your number. The silence that followed was electric. Passengers around the gate had grown quiet. Some stopped scrolling their phones. Others began whispering, eyes darting between Celeste and Cynthia. No one knew the full story, but they didn't need to. They could feel it. Something significant had just happened, and they had all seen it. Cynthia finally broke the silence. We'll handle this. I give you my word. Celeste offered a faint smile. Make sure your word is worth something. Then she picked up her boarding pass, finally scanned, and stepped past the counter. No cheering. No grand statement. Just quiet authority that moved like a ripple through every inch of the terminal. Behind her, Haley remained frozen. Mia said nothing. Cynthia turned to Justin and whispered, Suspend all priority boarding at JFK. We need to audit everything. Justin nodded. And the internal comms? Cynthia took a deep breath. Delay them. Let the silence speak first. The moment Celeste stepped past the boarding counter, the hush that had blanketed Gate 17 deepened into a silence that seemed to echo through the entire terminal. Her heels clicked once, twice, then silence returned, heavier this time. Every passenger in line, every airport employee within view, had stopped pretending to look away. They watched, not because of spectacle, but because something inside them whispered that this was bigger than one woman, one flight, one gate. Celeste didn't glance back. She didn't need to. Her dignity had already reversed the power dynamic without a single raised voice. And as she walked calmly through the private lane toward the boarding door, Cynthia Reyes followed behind, no longer the one leading the scene but the one learning from it. Inside the jet bridge, the head flight attendant, Jordan, stood waiting. He had been notified moments earlier, VIP guest boarding, maximum discretion and priority service. But no one told him why. He didn't need to ask. The way Celeste carried herself said enough. Welcome aboard, Miss Morgan, he said quietly, bowing his head slightly. We've prepared your seat and made the crew aware of your preference for minimal interaction. If there's anything, I'll let you know, Celeste replied simply. She stepped into the aircraft not as a guest, but as someone reclaiming the space that should never have been denied her in the first place. Seat 1A was pristine. The white leather was untouched, the folded napkin crisp beside the unopened bottle of mineral water. Everything was exactly as it should have been, except for the invisible weight that now lingered in the cabin. It was the kind of weight that made even seasoned flight attendants pause before speaking. A reminder that behind every boarding pass, every face, there could be a story. Celeste took her seat. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't sip the water. She sat still, hands folded gently in her lap, eyes fixed on the morning light gleaming through the oval window. Behind her, the first-class cabin slowly filled in. The man in one seat glanced toward her but said nothing. The woman in 2A adjusted her scarf awkwardly, clearly aware that something unspoken had occurred. No one asked questions but everyone felt like they were supposed to know. Back at the gate, Haley Dorsey stood behind the counter, face pale, lips pressed tight. She still hadn't moved since Celeste left. Mia approached slowly. You need to go home, she said softly. Haley shook her head. They'll fire me. Mia didn't respond right away. She just watched the flight info change from boarding to delayed, operational hold. Then she whispered, they might. But not for the reason you think. Haley looked at her, confusion clouding her expression. You didn't just misjudge a VIP, Mia continued. You exposed something deeper. And they can't ignore it now. None of us can. At that moment, in the operations room on the 10th floor, Cynthia Reyes stood at the head of a crisis response meeting. The internal monitors showed 3 other gates paused, with boarding delayed under vague labels: priority review, operational compliance, gate freeze. She looked around the room: legal, HR, comms, even a member of the DEI initiative team. They all waited for her to speak. Cynthia began, voice steady. This is not about a boarding error. This is not a customer service incident. This is systemic. We're not here because of one gate agent. We're here because somewhere in our training, our culture, our assumptions, we've allowed the people who look different to be treated as lesser. No one dared interrupt. Celeste Morgan, she continued, wasn't just a first-class passenger. She's the reason we even have a fresh flight program to sell. She saved our image. She redefined our food system. And we stopped her at the gate because she didn't fit the visual profile of a VIP. There was a long silence. Then Justin Cole spoke. What does she want? Cynthia sighed. She doesn't want a tweet. She doesn't want a press release. She wants action. Quiet, irreversible, permanent action. And that was the moment the tone in the room changed. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't about optics. It wasn't about saving face. It was about consequences. Back on the aircraft, Jordan quietly approached Celeste. Miss Morgan, he said, crouching slightly beside her. Forgive me if this is inappropriate, but I saw your interview from the food summit last fall. My younger brother is studying agriculture because of that talk. He said, she made it feel real. Celeste looked at him, then offered the first genuine smile of the morning. Then he's headed in the right direction. Jordan smiled in return and stepped back, understanding her tone. She wasn't interested in being put on a pedestal. She was interested in people doing better. As the rest of the cabin filled, a flight attendant approached with a tray, on it, a handwritten note and a small chocolate bar. She placed it on Celeste's tray table. From some of us in the crew, the young woman whispered. We don't know what happened exactly, but we know something wasn't right. Just wanted to say thank you for how you handled it. Celeste didn't respond right away. She gently touched the note with 2 fingers, then folded her hands again. No need to explain. No need to dramatize. The message had been received. Meanwhile, across the country, Jack Renault was in a video conference with Horizon's legal and operations teams. She didn't threaten to go public, he said. She didn't need to. Because the passengers around her are already doing it for her. Indeed, on Reddit, Twitter, and Instagram posts had started to appear. None of them tagged Horizon directly. But all told the same story. A black woman with a first-class ticket. Stopped at the gate. Said nothing. Made one call. And the airline froze. Gate 17 began trending, not because of outrage but because of quiet, burning clarity. And in a small kitchen back in Cleveland, Louise Morgan sat reading one of the first circulating articles. She set her tea down gently, then murmured with a small smile, "That's my daughter." Never needed to yell to be heard. The hum of the engine started to swell as Horizon Flight 488 taxied into position. But inside seat 1A, Celeste Morgan remained still. The power of her presence wasn't in her posture. It was in the silence that surrounded her. Even as the flight attendants moved down the aisle with pre-takeoff checks, their gestures were more deliberate, more respectful. No one dared to glance too long at her. But everyone knew who she was now. And the ripples were just beginning. At gate 17, Mia sat alone behind the desk. Haley had been quietly escorted from the area just minutes before takeoff, not by security but by HR. There were no dramatics, just an instruction to step away until further notice. Her shoulders were hunched, her hands trembling slightly as she left. She didn't protest. There was nothing left to defend. In her place, Mia took over the gate systems. But more than that, she carried the weight of what she had witnessed. The look Celeste had given her, not angry, not accusatory, had stayed with her. It was the look of someone who had seen this before, lived through it, and no longer wasted breath trying to justify her right to be treated fairly. Mia's fingers hovered over the intercom button. For a brief moment, she imagined pressing it and announcing something that no gate agent ever had the courage to say: "We apologize." Not for a mistake but for a mindset. But the system didn't allow for that. So she said nothing. And that, too, felt like failure. In the air, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during the slight delay. We are now cleared for takeoff. Flight time to San Francisco is approximately 5 hours and 36 minutes. Celeste kept her gaze out the window. The runway lights blurred past as the aircraft lifted into the pale blue sky. In Minneapolis, Jack Renault refreshed his feed again. The hashtags were multiplying. Hashtag Gate 17. Hashtag Silent Power. Hashtag Morgan Effect. Hashtag Fresh Flight Fail. There were no viral videos. No dramatic footage. Just first-hand accounts being retweeted by influencers, DEI advocates, and travel bloggers. And that was worse for Horizon. Because you can fight noise. You can issue rebuttals to outrage. But how do you fight the kind of story that spreads through quiet validation? In one post, a user wrote, "She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just stood there. And the whole airline bent." In another, "I was 3 rows behind. When they asked her for ID, it felt like a warning. Not to her. To us." Jack dropped his phone onto the conference table. "We need to move. Cynthia, are we proceeding with the internal audit?" Cynthia Reyes, seated across from him via Zoom, nodded grimly. "Already underway. All Northeast gates are on 72-hour hold for frontline review. We've frozen priority boarding access until we finish the personnel audit." Jack rubbed his temples. And Celeste. She didn't ask for a public apology. She asked for internal change. We owe her that and more. Back in the air, the first-class cabin was eerily quiet. Celeste didn't request a meal. She didn't accept the champagne or complimentary toiletries. She simply sat, hands folded, her presence unsettling the air more than any turbulence ever could. A man seated in 1C, a corporate lawyer judging by his phone notifications, finally leaned over slightly. "Miss Morgan," he began cautiously. I just wanted to say I saw what happened. And, if it had been me, I probably would have made a scene. I admire how you handled it." Celeste turned, met his gaze. "You don't fight every battle with volume," she said softly. "Some of the most dangerous things in this world were smiles and badges. I've learned that sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stand still." He nodded, humbled. "Thank you." At that moment, a flight attendant returned, not with an apology, but with a handwritten card and a silver-wrapped chocolate square. She placed it quietly on the tray in front of Celeste. Celeste glanced down at the note. "Thank you for not staying silent. Because of you, we know when to stand up." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But she placed a finger gently on the corner of the card and left it there, like a placeholder for something the whole cabin now shared, a truth that needed no microphone. Meanwhile, in the internal Slack channels at Horizon, the legal department posted a new update. Effective immediately. All staff working Gate 17 during the 488 departure must submit detailed logs of passenger interactions. New training modules on implicit bias and nonverbal profiling go live tonight. Failure to complete retraining within 72 hours will result in administrative hold. In the conference room, someone asked quietly, "Are we doing this because she's a VIP?" "No," Cynthia answered. "We're doing this because we didn't treat her like a person." At the same time, in a modest kitchen back in Dayton, Ohio, a middle-aged warehouse operator named Quinn read about the incident on Reddit. His wife, standing at the sink, looked over his shoulder. "Isn't that the woman who brought you that produced training last summer?" Quinn nodded slowly. "Yeah. She's the reason we got health benefits last year. She changed our whole supply chain." "She got stopped at the gate?" "Yeah," he said. "But she didn't scream. She didn't even post about it." His wife blinked. "And it's still going viral? That's how you know it's real." Celeste Morgan's silence had now become a signal, reaching not only boardrooms and break rooms but grocery aisles, warehouses, and classrooms. It wasn't just about what she did. It was about what others were finally forced to see. The wheels of Flight 488 touched down on San Francisco's runway at 11:34 a.m. local time. The descent had been smooth, the cabin quiet, but the energy on board was unmistakably different from takeoff. In first class, no one applauded. No one rushed to grab their bags. There was a shared awareness, subtle but profound, that they had been witnesses to something larger than a delayed flight. Celeste Morgan remained in seat 1A motionless. She didn't rise when the chime rang. She didn't look around. Instead, she sat still as she had for the past 5 hours, hands gently folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the shifting clouds outside the window. When Jordan, the head flight attendant, approached, it wasn't to hurry her or offer assistance. He leaned in with quiet sincerity. "The pilot asked if he could escort you to the arrivals gate," he said softly. He didn't say why. He just said he wanted to. Celeste shook her head gently. "No need. Let things be normal now." Jordan gave a small bow, understanding the weight of those words. He stepped aside as the cabin doors opened and passengers began to file out. A few offered glances of respect as they passed Celeste. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others simply nodded. But no one dared to speak to her directly. When she finally stood, Celeste retrieved her brown leather bag, its surface worn, the stitching slightly frayed. It was a gift from her son, purchased with savings from a summer job, meant to replace the plastic purse some students had mocked her for carrying years ago. She'd carried it ever since. She walked calmly down the aisle, past the hushed faces, and through the gate where a driver waited, holding a placard. "See, Morgan Fresh Systems." She gave him a brief nod and slid into the back seat of the black Lincoln. The phone in her coat pocket buzzed. 3 notifications. 1. Email from Cynthia Reyes. Subject: Internal Policy Overhaul in Progress. Body: We're conducting a full review of our frontline boarding procedures. All staff involved in JFK Gate 17 incident are under evaluation. Full audit results by end of week. Your message was heard. 2. Text from Maggie. They're halting the Fresh Flight campaign media rollouts until further notice. Rewriting training modules from scratch. HR just called, said you accomplished more in 1 call than their DI department did in 3 years. 3. News alert. Black CEO denied boarding in first class line, remained silent, sparked full airline audit. Celeste didn't respond. She powered off her phone and leaned back into the seat, allowing herself, for the first time that day, to exhale. Back at JFK, Horizon's internal operations network was lit up like a Christmas tree. Gate 17 had been flagged for procedural reengineering, and 3 adjacent gates were now under temporary boarding restrictions. In private HR Slack threads, words like reassessment, nonverbal profiling, and frontline escalation policy rewrite appeared repeatedly. But inside the corporate offices, the real conversation had shifted. A DI consultant, brought in months ago for a 6-figure initiative, now sat in a meeting room full of executives, wide-eyed. Why didn't she go public? Someone asked. Because she didn't have to, replied Jack Renault. That's what makes it worse. There's no scandal for us to deny. Just an undeniable truth that exposed itself through silence. In Dayton, Ohio, in a small office above a storage warehouse, Celeste's executive assistant, Maggie, was coordinating the delivery schedules. She watched the live GPS of 3 produced trucks arriving at different Horizon hubs across the West Coast. Tomatoes. Golden beets. The system was still moving because of Celeste. Not in spite of what happened, but because of it. And every box delivered now carried a quiet message. This woman feeds your entire cabin. And you nearly stopped her at the door. Meanwhile, in the San Francisco Marriott, the Western Food Sustainability Summit was about to begin. Inside the conference room, filled with regional grocers, logistics partners, and food supply executives, the air buzzed with rumor. I heard she's here. You mean Celeste Morgan? They said she's not doing interviews. Did she really shut down Horizon for 3 hours? Not a word. Just a phone call. At 12:55 p.m., the moderator walked onto the stage and cleared her throat nervously. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is the founder and CEO of Morgan Fresh Systems. She's a pioneer in clean food logistics and, well, if you're not already familiar with her story, you will be soon. A ripple of restrained anticipation swept the room. Then Celeste walked in. There was no spotlight. No music. No formal intro. She stepped onto the stage in her gray jacket and olive scarf, still the same outfit she wore when she was stopped just hours ago. The only addition was a small leaf-shaped pin, the Morgan Fresh logo, gleaming quietly on her lapel. She approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and paused. I'm not going to talk about what happened this morning, she began. Silence. I'm going to talk about what made it possible to happen. And what all of us in this room, leaders, suppliers, distributors, need to fix before we print another mission statement. Chairs shifted. Pens clicked. No one looked away. 18 months ago, one of my partner farms nearly lost a season's harvest because a warehouse assistant didn't recognize the grower's name on a shipment. One missed email. One assumption. And we were almost out of stock for the entire Southwest. She looked around the room. Her voice remained calm. It wasn't the software. It wasn't the truck. It was someone's assumption. She waited a beat. And this morning, it wasn't the gate. It wasn't the boarding system. It was someone's assumption. The air turned dense. A few executives looked down at their shoes. One man near the back of the room coughed uncomfortably. We talk about food decay, she continued. But we never talk about human decay, The kind that starts not in the crate but in the gaze. No one spoke. No one needed to. Celeste closed with a line that would later appear in industry training manuals. You can optimize your supply chain all you want. But if your people can't look past their assumptions, you're just delivering bias in biodegradable packaging. Celeste stepped off the stage not to a standing ovation, but to something far more powerful. Silence filled with reflection. No clapping, no networking chatter, no rush to exchange business cards. Just a room full of supply chain executives, CEOs, and distributors reeling, not from offense but from the realization that they had been handed a mirror they could no longer ignore. Backstage, a young woman from the event logistics team approached her nervously. She clutched a folded program in one hand and a pen in the other. "Miss Morgan," she said softly, I watched what happened this morning online. I wasn't there but I read everything. My father's a truck driver. He's been turned away so many times just because of his appearance. Thank you for saying what he couldn't." Celeste didn't smile. But she reached out, took the program and signed it. No flourish. Just a quiet acknowledgement. "That story is his. I just helped make it heard," she replied. At Horizon Air's JFK office, the audit was accelerating. Internal teams were cross-checking body cam footage from security staff, badge swipes from boarding agents, and every timestamp in the gate system from the moment Celeste approached until the moment she scanned her ticket. The findings were damning. And no technical errors. No mismatched name. And no policy breach, except the unspoken one, that Haley Dorsey used her instinct rather than procedure. Haley's instinct had cost the company millions and halted operations, damaged internal morale, and exposed a cultural fault line they had spent years pretending didn't exist. In a quiet office on the 8th floor, Haley sat across from a member of HR. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even arguing. "I didn't mean to," she muttered. "It just didn't feel right. Something felt off." "And what was off about her?" the HR director asked gently but firmly. Haley couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she finally did. At Horizon's Minneapolis headquarters, Jack Renault paced outside a conference room where legal and PR teams had just been told to stand down. "There will be no media statement," Cynthia Reyes had said in the emergency call. "No press release. No prepared apology. That's not what she asked for." "But we have to say something," one executive protested. "No," Cynthia said. "We have to do something." She pointed toward the wall where a framed slogan hung. "Horizon, service above all." She stared at it for a long moment. Then she turned back. "I want every single boarding agent retrained. I want our DI budget doubled. And I want the gate that stopped her, Gate 17, temporarily decommissioned for full internal process reconstruction. Until it no longer functions on instinct." A week later, a quiet update appeared on the company's internal portal. Effective immediately, Gate 17 is under indefinite review. All personnel reassigned. All training updated. All bias flagged. And the following line, buried in the legal memo. "The actions that led to the detainment of Celeste Morgan do not reflect the values of Horizon Air. While no public statement will be made at this time, all internal reforms have been documented and communicated directly with the involved parties." Back in San Francisco, Celeste returned to her hotel room. There were no reporters at the door. No camera crews. Just a small note slid under her door. It was from the driver who had picked her up at the airport. "Miss Morgan, I didn't want to interrupt your piece. But I drove you once 3 years ago. You gave me a $100 tip and said, 'Buy fresh food, not fast food.' I've been doing that ever since. Thank you." She read it once, folded it, placed it in the leather folder with the contract. Later that night, at a quiet dinner with 3 agricultural leaders from the Midwest who had invited her privately, the tone was different. They didn't mention JFK. They didn't ask about the delay. One of them, a white man in his 60s with calloused hands and a slow drawl, leaned forward between bites of roasted squash and said, "You ever feel like the world's finally listening, but only after it's been deaf for decades?" Celeste took a sip of water before answering. "No," she replied. "I think the world's always known. But it's just now starting to admit it." Back at Horizon, internal documents were beginning to circulate among mid-level managers. Anonymous staff submitted testimonies of their own experiences, moments they had been ignored, dismissed, or doubted because they didn't look the part. A baggage handler wrote, "I've had passengers assume I couldn't speak English because of my name tag." A desk agent confessed, "I've watched colleagues slow walk certain passengers based on appearance. I didn't stop them. I should have. The incident with Celeste had unlocked something deeper than HR forms. It had exposed the unspoken currency of every service job, the power of perception, and how easily that power could destroy trust. Cynthia Reyes issued an internal directive. Starting next quarter, every Horizon employee, from intern to executive, will undergo a mandatory simulation experience, putting themselves in the shoes of those our biases target the most. They will feel what it means to be invisible, doubted, slowed, or sidelined. And they will be taught not just to avoid it, but to recognize when they've become part of it. No press release. No branded initiative. Just change, quiet, sweeping, and irreversible. Meanwhile, in a high school on the south side of Cleveland, Celeste's daughter Amari presented her senior project, Silent Systems, How Bias Travels Faster Than Planes. Her first slide? A black and white photo of Gate 17. Her last line? My mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't call for boycotts. But she made an entire airline pause. Because sometimes the loudest protest is standing still. The teacher wiped a tear from her cheek. The class sat in stunned silence. And in that moment, the legacy of that morning flight, one woman, one call, one refusal to shrink, took root in the next generation. At the Morgan Fresh Systems office in Dayton, Ohio, the third-floor conference room was unusually quiet. The walls, decorated not with plaques or product ads but with old photographs from produce stands and handwritten recipes taped beside supply chain maps, carried an energy of legacy, not luxury. Celeste Morgan sat at the end of the long wooden table, a legal pad in front of her, not to draft another speech or issue another directive, but to review the winter rotation logistics for small farms in the Midwest. Work hadn't stopped, even as stories about her continued to echo across the country. She didn't follow them. She didn't post a statement. She hadn't even read most of the articles. But they came anyway. In the business blog Equity Forward, a writer published a think piece titled, The Gate Where the Sky Shifted. What Happens When You Try to Block a Woman Who Owns the Flight Plan? It was shared thousands of times across LinkedIn and Twitter, not for its drama but for its sobering simplicity. One line, in particular, resonated everywhere. Celeste Morgan didn't disrupt Horizon Air. She revealed that it was already broken, and gave it a blueprint to rebuild. Meanwhile, internal emails at Horizon told a very different story, one of a corporation scrambling to keep up with a shift it had never expected. Gate 17 remained out of service. Its schedule, once brimming with back-to-back departures, now displayed a blank slate each morning, an eerie silence in the airport's rhythm. Passengers waiting nearby often whispered, "That's the gate, right?" Managers now walked the floor twice a day, clipboard in hand, watching more closely, not for security threats but for the glances, hesitations, and dismissals that could no longer be allowed to pass as standard practice. Inside the company's staff newsletter, a small update appeared in a sidebar box. Horizon Air is proud to announce a new partnership with Equity Now for ongoing training and behavioral audits across our Northeast region. We believe that true progress begins when we stop defending what we think we are, and start examining what we've become. Back at Morgan Fresh, Maggie Geller entered Celeste's office with a small box in her hands. She placed it on the desk. "Another letter," she said. "This one came from a flight attendant. No return address." Celeste looked up but didn't open the box right away. "It's handwritten," Maggie added. "He said he was in training at the time of your flight. But he heard. They all did." Celeste unfolded the letter. "Miss Morgan, I wasn't there that morning. But since that day we've all walked differently, scanned differently, thought differently. I didn't know that silence could carry weight until yours made the whole system pause. Thank you for showing us that power doesn't always need volume. Sometimes it just needs presence." Celeste folded the note and slid it into the side pocket of her bag. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She simply returned to her notes, reviewing a delivery route between 2 farms in Iowa. Because while others were still talking about her, she was still building. That same day, in the Horizon legal department, Justin Cole walked past a room where DI trainers were running their first news session. On the projection screen was an image of Celeste Morgan, not her face but her silhouette at Gate 17, standing beside a security officer, with her boarding pass resting untouched on the counter. The caption beneath it read, "What you see isn't always what's real. What you assume has a cost." In airports across the country, a quiet ripple had begun. A young Asian woman in Seattle was no longer questioned twice about her upgraded ticket. A disabled man in Denver noticed that staff no longer offered help with patronizing smiles. A black teen in Boston, traveling alone in a suit for a scholarship interview, was greeted with a simple "welcome, sir," instead of a suspicious glance. None of these shifts made headlines. But Celeste hadn't asked for headlines. She had asked for action. And action had begun, not through policies alone, but through a changed awareness in those who held the scanners, opened the gates and offered the first greeting. 1 month later, on an unusually warm winter afternoon, Celeste walked into her old grocery store on Euclid Avenue, the one where her mother, Louise, used to work before retirement. She was there to pick up carrots for dinner with Amari, who had just returned from presenting her senior thesis on systemic bias in supply systems. At the checkout counter, a teenage girl paused as she scanned the produce. Her eyes widened. "Are you?" she started to ask, then stopped. Celeste just smiled gently. "I'm someone who believes you belong anywhere your feet can carry you." The girl nodded, unsure of how to respond. But as she handed over the receipt, she said quietly, "Thank you. For whatever it is you did. I've heard things. And they made me feel like, maybe I can build something too." Celeste took the bag of produce and gave the girl a soft nod. "You can," she said. "And when they tell you otherwise, just stand still. Let the system catch up to you." She walked out into the light. No press. No headlines. No roar of applause. Just the click of her heels echoing down the sidewalk, and the quiet shift of a world learning to look harder, think longer, and treat better. In a world that still measures worth by assumptions, Celeste Morgan proved that you don't need to shout to demand change. You don't have to retaliate to be powerful. And you don't need to threaten to shake the system. Sometimes all it takes is standing still and refusing to shrink. At True Echo, we bring you stories that challenge, uplift, and expose the truth hiding in plain sight. This story moved you, share it. If you've ever witnessed quiet injustice, speak up. And if you believe change begins with stories like these, subscribe, comment below, and help echo the truth louder than ever.